May I kindly ask the male professors to take off their hats? I open this session with a prayer. May the spirit of wisdom and mercy grow and blossom in all of us. Please be seated. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Ich möchte im Besonderen die Familien der jungen Hochlehrer herzlich willkommen heißen. Now we go back to normal, that is English. We are here today on the occasion of Professor Tobias J. Klein accepting the chair of econometrics at the Department of Econometrics and Operations Research of the Tilburg School of Economics and Management. Professor Klein was appointed to this chair on October 1st, 2018, and we will listen to his inaugural lecture shortly. Tobias Klein studied economics at the University of Mannheim, the University of California at Berkeley, and the University College London. In 2007, after obtaining his PhD at the University of Mannheim, he joined the Tilburg School of Economics and Management at Tilburg University. He has many publications in leading journals to his name, such as the Journal of Public Economics and the Economic Journal. He is deputy managing editor of the Economics Journal and associate editor of Empirical Economics and the Review of Economics. His research focuses on health economics, empirical industrial organization, and econometrics. He is currently working on the design of health insurance and studies the effects of patient cost sharing, consumer behavior, the effect of advertising, competition between online platforms, two-sided markets, and rating systems in online markets. Professor Klein teaches in the joint Bachelor in Data Science, which is a joint education program of Tilburg University and Eindhoven Technical University. He is also involved in the Center Research Master in Economics and supervises several PhD students. Well, that's more than enough, I would say. All the more reason, ladies and gentlemen, to listen now to Professor Tobias Klein. His lecture is entitled Individual Behavior in Complex Choice Situations. I would like to invite you to give your inaugural lecture.
Thank you all for coming. Good to see you here. It's a great privilege to be an academic, and I'm honored to deliver this inaugural address. In the next 45 minutes, I will take you on a little journey. I will talk about some of my research, econometrics more generally, and why I believe it's more exciting than ever to be an applied empirical researcher. Life is complex and complicated. We have to continuously make decisions. Some of these decisions are easy ones, and routines help us to choose what to wear, what to have for breakfast, how to go to work, and how to organize a normal day, to name just a few examples. Other decisions are more complex. Should I buy a house now, or should I wait? Which house? How much should I bid for it? Different context, how much should I save? How should I invest my money? Should I look for another job? Should I move somewhere else? Which school is best for my kids? Which new TV should I buy? And of course, standard economics tells us it's very easy. There's a budget constraint, and we have preferences, and then we know what to do, right? But in real life, these decisions are complex because of uncertainty, a lack of information, and because it's highly personal, actually, whether a decision is actually a good one or a bad one, at least sometimes. And life is complicated because we have to make many decisions, face time constraints, cognitive constraints, and because some of these decisions are intertwined. So what do? We generally look at things in isolation to simplify life. We resort to heuristics, we copy decisions of others, we rely on intuition, or we simply don't make a decision. But of course, that's also a decision, so it doesn't get better in some sense. One can study individual decision-making for many reasons. I'm an economist by training, and my main motivation is that in the end of the day, economists are in the business of helping policymakers to design better institutions. In my view, this should be based on evidence. Econometrics is the part of economics that develops the tools and empirical approaches that can be used to actually provide such evidence. In the following, what I will do is I will illustrate this with 3 examples. Now, I'm pretty sure that everyone in this room here has health insurance. This is a great achievement of modern society, no doubt, especially in Europe. But we should, of course, not forget that we are blessed to live in the first world. Health insurance protects us against financial risks and gives us access to a system of healthcare providers. But are there additional benefits? Maybe there are, who knows? Especially when life is complicated and when we do not always make perfect decisions. A few years ago, together with my former student Noelia Bernal and our co-author Miguel Angel Carpio, I studied this question for Peru. That resulted in a paper that was later published. Peru provides an interesting setting for this because there was actually a substantial fraction of the population that didn't have health insurance. Actually, what I've learned when doing this study was that it's not the normal thing that you have a dependent employment relationship. It's the normal thing that you just work for yourself and you earn some money, and this is how you go through life. You basically take the money and you live from day to day. Now, in the early 2000s, the Peruvian government figured that this was not exactly what they wanted to have in terms of health insurance because people weren't insured. So they started to provide health insurance to the poor without a formal job for free. So from then onwards, people were actually insured. Now, health insurance, right? So one of the main themes in econometrics is that of endogeneity. Endogeneity is something that many people who have never studied economics or econometrics also intuitively understand. They intuitively understand that correlation is not causation. And this is what endogeneity is all about in the end of the day. So the challenge here is, of course, that one cannot directly compare individuals who have health insurance to individuals who don't. They're simply different, right? Before they introduced health insurance to the poor, those who had health insurance, they also had a formal job, they earned money, they were richer, etc., etc. But it was even the case after the introduction of this health insurance that you couldn't simply compare people with health insurance to people without health insurance. So what we did in this paper was to actually zoom in. Okay, so when you look at the institutional details, then what you realize is that there was one institutional detail that we could make use of, namely that individuals were covered by health insurance when an index that the government had already calculated for everybody, and that is something that was called a welfare index, how well people are doing, was below a certain threshold value. What we did then was to recompute the index for a sample of individuals, and then what we did for the estimation step was to compare people who were just eligible for free health insurance to people who were just not eligible for free health insurance. And what one gets from such an analysis is a figure like this. What we see in this figure here is horizontal axis on which we have the value of the index minus the threshold value. So 0 means that your index is exactly equal to that eligibility threshold. So who would be eligible? The ones in the negative domain, all right? And what we have on the vertical axis is the fraction of people for each value of the index that receives curative care in some period before the survey. Okay? So 0.2 means 20% of the people did receive some form of curative care. Think of curative care as, you got a problem and you get it fixed. So what one can see here in this figure is that there's a jump. Okay, and this is the interesting part of the figure, that one can actually give a causal interpretation. Okay, when we move from the right of the threshold when you're just not eligible to the left of the threshold when you're just eligible, then you see that care consumption increases. So those who are eligible for free health insurance are covered for at least some treatments, and therefore one should observe what one does actually observe, which is a price effect. Care is cheaper, so people consume more of it. At the same time, the figure shows actually a positive trend. Okay, so actually people who are better off, that is more globally looking at the figure, people who are better off actually consume more care. And that is actually related to something that we came back to later in the paper. Now, so far, this is not too exciting, and it's not too informative about the way people actually make decisions. What was interesting about this project was that the data were actually particularly rich, which allowed us to shed more light on how individuals make decisions. In particular, the data also contained information on the financing source for particular treatments. And when we used that information, then what we actually found was that insurance coverage had a positive effect on the probability to be hospitalized or to receive surgery. But interestingly, patients actually paid for this themselves. Okay, so our prior was it's paid for, so we would observe this exact price effect, but what we actually observed was that people went to the hospital and paid for it themselves. And indeed, when we then look at out-of-pocket expenditures, we find that back. Okay, so you become eligible for free health insurance, and then what increases is the amount you pay yourself for healthcare. Okay, so this pure price effect story isn't completely true. Let's put it like this. Now, to interpret this finding, it's useful to learn a little bit more about the institutional background in Peru. So I'll tell you a little bit more about it. So what people normally do in Peru, or did normally do in Peru, was to go to a pharmacy or to some healthcare provider and buy medication or treatments when they had some health problem of some sort. So that already means that out-of-pocket healthcare expenditures are not zero when they're not insured. And what many people also would probably not think here is that you can basically get all the drugs you like at a pharmacy, right? There's not like this institution of prescription drugs. You just go to the pharmacy and you say what your favorite drug is that you would like to buy, and then you just buy it. Okay. Now, I've lost my train of thought. So what happened then was the following. Health insurance made people go to a healthcare center. And when they went to a healthcare center, they saw a doctor for free. The doctor told them, dear patient, you got a problem, but unfortunately we can't help you. You have to pay for the treatment yourself. So essentially, what we have here is that free health insurance gave people the idea that they needed treatment, and then what they did, and this is remarkable, they found this useful and actually went for treatment and paid for this themselves. We found this remarkable because what it shows is that we have to think of individuals in much richer ways than what traditional models of demand, where individuals have preferences and react to prices, would actually presume. In fact, the way we design institutions seems to matter a great deal, even if the economic incentives are more or less the same. Individuals go to a healthcare center and seek advice when it is free, as compared to a situation when they have to pay a small fee. So it's really that difference between a true zero and a small positive amount that matters. And individuals actually undertake treatments when they're told to do so, even if they have to pay for those themselves. So free health insurance could have positive effects, even if treatments are not paid for. And that is interesting. One way to think about this is that when life is complicated, poor individuals face many challenges in Peru. And when decisions are complex, what to do when one is poor and is plagued by pain or suffers from an illness, then decisions of individuals depend on many other factors other than economic incentives, and in particular, what people believe is expected of them. We believe this is really important, what people believe is expected of them, and this is what institutions also communicate. Small details of institutions do also communicate what somehow society expects from people. When a free healthcare system is put in place, then they might interpret this as being expected to see a doctor. Without it, they simply go to the pharmacy and buy some drugs, or don't do much. This means, in turn, that it would be harmful for policymakers to rely on theories of patient behavior that abstract from all other aspects of life. and look at a choice situation in isolation. Now, econometrics is useful because it can help us to provide evidence on how individuals actually make decisions, to learn about this, which will then enable policymakers to design better institutions. In the case of Peru, it seems that motivating individuals to seek advice from a doctor has positive effects, so policies that promote this have the great potential of being welfare improving. We have just seen that presenting the healthcare system as accessible by introducing a truly free health insurance with coverage of basic services, such as initial screening, can have large effects. Arguably, it should not matter whether something is free or has a small price, but in practice, it does seem to matter a lot. Maybe a small price signals something to them. This relates to a larger body of work in behavioral economics and framing. Broadly speaking, the finding of that literature is that framing effects can be very important. In particular, presenting the exact same prospect or lottery differently has large effects on individual behavior. One way to think about this is that individuals don't fully understand what they're evaluating. But I was always reluctant to say that this is irrational. After all, there could be a cost to evaluating a prospect, and it could be rational not to spend too much time or energy thinking about it. In joint work with Arthur Hayen, where is he? There, and Martin Salm, also here. I've studied the effects of framing on behavior of Dutch patients in the context of health insurance. So that resulted in a nice joint paper as well. It is not yet published, so busy with that. Most of you will be familiar with the system. These days, there's a deductible in place, which means that the first 385 euros of care are basically for your own pocket. And some types of care are exempted, for instance, GP care. Okay, so when you go to the GP, you don't have to pay for that. So this is like, when you think about going to the doctor, this comes to mind. You can think for yourselves. I personally have mixed feelings when I think of a doctor. There's always something bad involved. I don't know. So now think about how one should react to incentives, right? And once you think about this, and once you consult the literature, you realize that it's actually not so easy. Okay, so it's always interesting to see what a super rational consumer should do. And this is something Randall Ellis has actually studied in '86. So he said, look, if I have a patient who can, smooth consumption and who is fully forward-looking and knows everything and, has rational expectations, does not face liquidity constraints, then that patient should not look at whether he has to pay right now for a treatment, so whether he still is under the deductible limit of 385 euros. No, what the patient should actually do is to form expectations about care consumption, during the rest of the year, and also decisions made during the rest of the year, and should ask himself, well, by the end of the year, will I actually pay for the next unit of care myself? This is how we should evaluate this prospect or think about this decision, whether or not to go to the doctor. So one has to form beliefs about care consumption in the future, and one needs to think about medical needs and prices. So one actually needs to know prices, right? So most people actually don't know the price of a treatment, and it's very hard to find out what the price of a treatment actually is. So maybe people will find this too complicated, and they don't want to think about this too much anyway when they think about this doctor who is maybe there. And indeed, there's more and more evidence accumulating that this is actually not what they do. So what they do is that they do something simpler. So they essentially consume less care when they still have to pay for it, and once they don't have to pay for it anymore, they consume more care. So arguably, this shows that individuals perceive this as a complex and challenging choice situation. We take this as a starting point and study how they react to policy changes that do actually not change financial incentives from the viewpoint of a rational individual, but change the way these are being presented. And luckily, what we could make use of is the fact that the deductible in 2008 was introduced in 2008 and replaced a so-called no-claim refund. The refund worked like this. If one did not consume any care, then after the end of the year, one received a certain amount of money back. Okay, refund. And for any euro of care that was consumed during the year, one received €1 less after the end of the year. So it turns out that this provides very similar incentives as a deductible does, up to the cost-sharing limit, the maximum rebate. €1 more healthcare consumption means €1 less for other consumption. And it's always on a yearly basis. Okay? But the presentation is very different. A deductible presents cost-sharing incentives as a loss. One has to pay money when one sees a doctor, whereas a payback rebate presents them in terms of gains. One receives less of a rebate. When individuals react stronger to losses than to gains, and this is something we have more and more evidence on, then we should see that individuals react stronger to cost-sharing incentives when they're framed in terms of a deductible. And when we took a first look at the data, this is actually what we saw. So what you see here is a figure where we say time 0 on the horizontal axis is the week in which you hit the cost-sharing limit. Okay, so in time 0, something big happens. Say you break your leg and whatnot, right? So something big, and you see this also. All the way up, there's a data point, okay? On the vertical axis, we have care consumption. We have actually the dots and the squares. So the dots are care consumption in 2007 under no-claim refund, and the squares are care consumption under deductible in 2008. So what you see to the right of 0 is that care consumption in a statistical sense is the same. Okay, so once people don't have to pay, they consume a lot. Okay, much more than before hitting the cost-sharing level limit. To the left, what you see is that care consumption is actually higher under a no-claim refund. Okay, so what that means is that what I told you before, indeed, it seems as if people react more strongly to a deductible than they do to a no-claim refund, even though both actually have the same economic incentives. So we do all this then, like econometrically sound with instrumental variables and lots of analysis and lots of robustness checks and lots of looking into what is the mechanism and whether other things could explain these findings and so on and so forth. But by and large, we can exclude all alternative explanations and come down on our personal verdict and interpretation that indeed it's a framing effect that is at play here. We also do a little simulation, and what we find is that the effect is quantitatively important. So care consumption is 8.6% lower when incentives are framed in terms of losses as opposed to gains. So that's really a lot. Whether or not this is good, by the way, remains an open question. So there's a long tradition of people actually not being able to answer that question all that well, and we're not contributing to answering that question either. So what we show here is that the framing really matters also in the context of health, but we do have to still understand better whether We actually want people to react to cost-sharing incentives. Maybe they overreact. Maybe certain groups overreact. Maybe people stop doing preventive care. We have some first insights into this, but it's not that there's a conclusive answer yet. So what our paper shows is that framing effects are quantitatively important in the context of cost sharing and health insurance. We have investigated whether it's driven by just particular groups. One could imagine, for example, that there's an average effect that is driven by poor individuals. But this is actually not the case. Once more, it seems that complex decisions are influenced greatly by the way in which individuals experience the decision environment, and that is actually moved around by small details. And here it would be, well, maybe it's not a small detail, but it would be the framing, the presentation of incentives, and not the incentives themselves. Now, third example. We've now seen two examples where a simple model in which individuals choose what they like best does not describe, fully at least, how they actually make a decision. In the last example, I would like to focus on thinking of choice as a process. Imagine that you have surfed the internet and you want to buy a product. It would be nice to have it for a particular occasion. Let's say it's something to wear for a birthday party or a power tool to get some work done at home during a long weekend. You've read multiple reviews, looked at some websites to compare prices, and you've made up your mind. But you haven't gotten around to actually buying it. After all, life is complicated and there are many other things to do, so you've decided to do it later. At least some people act in that way. Maybe including me. The event is drawing closer. One evening, you're on Facebook, and after a while, you see an advertisement reminding you of the product. Obviously, many of us will now think of all kinds of reservations that come with this, privacy concerns. These are important, but here I would like to focus on a different aspect. This advertisement reminds you of your intended purchase. And you know, the better it is targeted, the better it does so. And when it reaches you in the right moment, you may at last buy the product. And you may like that. This is a way to think about advertising that's at least unusual. The literature, by and large, has distinguished between advertising that provides information, and what people have in mind there is people don't know prices, so you learn about prices or the existence of products. Or advertising would change preferences. And here people also are a bit wondering still whether this is good or bad. Okay? So it influences what you like. And empirically, of course, it's challenging to analyze whether there's actually something to our reminder story, right? But my former student Chen He and we actually believe that we have found a nice setting in which we can investigate whether advertising does actually act as a reminder. What we do is we look at a product that has been around for 300 years. And most products are not around for 300 years. They're around for much shorter. It's a ticket for the Dutch state lottery. Very simple product. The advantage is that it's extremely well known, so that, unlike in many other contexts, these two channels that are sort of the traditional channels of advertising are less important, right? So it doesn't really inform us about the existence of the product. People know that, right? It doesn't really change our preferences towards the product. People have thought about this product for a lot. They have made up their mind. So the only two things it actually does is it informs us about the size of the jackpot. That's one. And the second thing advertising does is it reminds us of making a purchase. So, this is how the ads look. actually very effective. So here's the draw, you got 4 days left, right? And tomorrow you see, you got 3 days left. So it's really counting down, and people get this idea. If I don't buy, I might forget. And what's also interesting is a phenomenon called, the second screen. Many people actually sit in front of the TV with their smartphones, at least in their pockets. So when they get the idea that they, should maybe buy that lottery ticket at last, they can now do it with their smartphone, right? So it's actually easy. And what this gave us was a very nice setting where we could actually use high-frequency data on TV and radio advertising and on online sales to estimate advertising effects and basically show two things. One is that they're strong and short-lived. So that is really in line with the idea that it's about attention. Attention is drawn to that product, and then attention also fades away quickly. Okay, so that's one thing we could show. And the second thing we could show is that advertising effects are the stronger, the less time there is until the draw. Okay, in line with the idea that you react more strongly to advertising when your intention to buy is actually higher. So let me show you just some picture for the first. So what you see here is a plot where you have 0. 0 is the time at which the advertisement is actually aired. So before 0 is sort of the pre-advertisement time. And what you see is that sales are basically flat before that. And that is also important because if they would wiggle around a lot, right, then it would be harder to see actually in the data whether advertising does something. And the dashed line is the average of sales in this period. Okay, so the dashed line is just the average of this slightly wiggly line to the left. So you can think of the dashed line as being a baseline, okay, on the right. So the dashed line on the right would basically be what would have happened without the advertisement. And then you see the solid line on the right. So that is the sales curve, right, against time. So the difference between the solid line and the dashed line, that would be the effect of advertising. Okay? So what you see, it peaks after like 10 to 15 minutes, and then it fades away. And this is for big advertisements. So big advertisements are advertisements that reach a lot of people. So this is how we define them. By the way, this shows that nowadays, and that's exciting, advertising effects are actually measurable. Right? For a long time, we had a hard time actually measuring them, and now we can actually measure them. Then we use a structural model to quantify the overall effects of advertising, and we find that sales would be 35% lower if we turned off all advertising. So advertising that does actually remind people of making a purchase has a huge effect. Of course, we don't know what the price was for all this advertising, but at least, with this in hand, Staatsdatei could think about that, whether it was worth it. I bet it probably was. You can, of course, now say that it's probably good when consumers forget to buy a lottery ticket and do something more useful with their money. That's true. We actually don't take a stance on this in our paper, as our main takeaway is that we can use our setting to convincingly show that advertising can act as a reminder and that the effects of this are actually large. More broadly, what we show is that models of consumer behavior in which consumers can forget to make a purchase can actually be realistic. This may make us think of advertising in a different way, be it for a lottery ticket or some targeted advertising on Facebook. For instance, advertising by the government could remind consumers to consider switching their energy contract or their health insurance, which could lead to more competition and therefore lead to welfare gains. Okay, so the government could make use of that. Maybe we as a university could make use of that and remind students of coming to us when it's the right time to actually make a choice to come study. So, now we have seen 3 examples of complex choice situations. Complexity arises for poor individuals in Peru because they are not very well informed about the consequences of not undergoing treatment, and it's difficult for them to learn about this. A small fee prevented them from seeking advice by a doctor. Free health insurance turned that around, and people then even paid for treatments themselves. Complexity arises for Dutch patients as well, as they have to understand the dynamic incentives and form beliefs about future healthcare consumption and healthcare prices. So they seem to take current incentives as a proxy. But then it turns out that they react to current incentives very differently when they're presented in terms of losses instead of smaller gains. A classic framing effect. So there's a certain non-robustness arising out of complexity, and then, for that reason, small details begin to matter. And that is something we found interesting in various contexts, and I find interesting. And finally, complexity arises when one decision is surrounded by many others, and consumers are time and attention constrained, so that they might forget to do something they intend to do. Then reminders could help them to remember and actually do it. So they may value them even if they come in the form of an advertisement. The three examples show that relating individual behavior to details of the choice situation when performing an empirical analysis allows us to better understand why individuals make certain decisions. Ultimately, this enables us to reach richer conclusions and make better recommendations to policymakers. The econometric challenge is at the same time to pay attention to these details when performing the analysis. For instance, when individuals are prone to forgetting, then a choice model that is estimated should feature an attention stage that determines whether an individual considers buying. Next to the more classical choice stage. And when choice is about buying now or maybe later, then the choice stage should also take into account that tomorrow one might forget to consider buying. A related challenge is to find ways to actually identify parameters of such a model, because the data are not always directly informative about them. I believe that it's more exciting than ever to do applied empirical work in economics as richer and more data are available that then allow us to actually study choice behavior in more detail, because we can identify more and more of the extra variation that becomes available to us. At the same time, I believe that simply running some machine learning models is not making full use of the potential of the data. In this context, I would like to share a quote I particularly like and that some of you have seen before. Dick might like it as heading like the data science theme. Statistical information is currently accumulating at an unprecedented rate. But no amount of statistical information, however complete and exact, can by itself explain economic phenomena. If we are not to get lost in the overwhelming, bewildering mass of statistical data that are now becoming available, we need the guidance and help of a powerful theoretical framework. Without this, no significant interpretation and coordination of our observations will be possible. So, what is nice about this quote is that it's actually from Ragnar Frisch, who is the founding father of, one of the founding fathers of econometrics. And he wrote this in his editorial to the first issue of Econometrica in 1933. I believe the message is still true 86 years later. We need econometrics to make sense of what we find in the data. A lot of progress has been made in econometrics, and now a large toolkit is already at the disposal of applied researchers. But at the same time, there's more than enough that we don't know yet. For instance, related to the analysis of individual behavior in complex choice situations, and all these little things that actually make a difference. The aim of today's talk is not to talk about technical details, but in many of the projects I'm actually involved in, these are very important. And there's a methodological side that fits very well with the definition of econometrics that Ragnar Frisch gave in the exact same editorial. So not in this quote, but there's a very nice text around that. He saw econometrics as the unification of statistics, economic theory, and mathematics, as opposed to, I quote, the application of mathematics to economics or economic statistics. And he explains very well what the difference between these two is. What is close to my heart is the applied relevance of what we do in econometrics. It is easy to forget about this when one is enthusiastically generalizing empirical approaches, but I think it's actually good to always ask oneself whether a generalization of some sort is actually of applied relevance. This is also the reason why I'm very happy to be involved in the Econometrics Journal and to be part of the Econometrics department here in Tilburg that, drawing on its many international connections, has a tradition of doing econometrics that is actually of applied relevance. So think of also Center Lab, all the surveys that we run, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we also stress this more and more, and I quite like that, when we teach econometrics to our students. And that is also something that I like quite a bit, and that is a very nice thing that we do here. I'm running out of time, right? How much time do I have? Oh, nobody seems to be worried. Nobody seems to be really worried. Yeah, let me wrap up a bit. So first of all, what are the key takeaways so far? It's people who make decisions. Small details matter a lot because life is complex. If people think about something long enough and if they take the time, they can figure it out, right? But we do many things. So life is complex, so we maybe overreact to small details. Policymakers should take that into account when designing institutions, and economic policy, in my view, should be based on empirical evidence. And for this, I believe we need econometrics. What I don't want to do here is to point fingers, right? I don't want to say, oh, these stupid people, they make the wrong decisions. Alice has said, you should react to the end-of-year price, and you don't, haha, you're so stupid. So that is not sort of what I want to say. What I want to say is, maybe there are good reasons why people don't do that. And it's always interesting to also look at one's own decisions. So I prepared this extra example for all of you here. So think about the likelihood to have higher healthcare spending than the minimum cost-sharing limit, and that will be 385 euros in 2020. You can leave away GP care because that's free, right? So forming that expectation is already not so easy, right? So now think about the distribution of healthcare spending. You summarize your beliefs using a distribution. Not so easy. For some of you, it will be easy. Now think about the following. You can increase, actually, the cost-sharing limit by 500 euros. Also less, if you like. The voluntary deductible, freiwillig Eigenrisiko, something very sensitive as a topic. In return, you pay lower premiums, let's say 200 euros. Do you want to do that? We know actually that it's a very good idea for many people to do it. Yet, we don't see that in the data, right? So why is that? So do they not think about it? Do they not like the idea? Maybe they've never really thought it through. Maybe they don't understand. So in any case, it's surprising. The worst that can happen, and this is something I find interesting as an angle. The worst that can happen is that one pays 300 euros more per year. Okay, that sounds already not so bad. Why? Because you have 500 euro extra deductible, but of course you get 200 euros already back because you pay lower premium. More likely, and this is just looking at the data and healthcare needs in terms of the costs people have had, more likely actually one pays less. So sort of in expectation, the payment is much, much lower. And the break-even point is healthcare spending of 585 euros. Okay, so when healthcare spending is 585 euros, you pay exactly the same for both sort of contracts. Okay, so when you expect less than 585 euros, you should probably go for a voluntary deductible of 500 euros. So if this now makes you think about it and makes you maybe change your decision, it's already interesting, right? Because why haven't you done that before? Because maybe you never really thought about it. Okay, so this is a little bit also the gist of my talk. Good. This brings me to the end. To me, being an academic is the best job in the world. Tilburg University offers a productive and inspiring academic environment, and I'm very proud and honored to be part of it. I'm grateful to many people, and there's no way I can rename them all, so I won't do that. I'd like to single out a few. So first of all, I wouldn't stand here today if it wasn't for my parents. It's literally true, but of course, this is not what I mean. You need them to be there. The way you brought me up by creating a loving, caring, and stimulating environment while always being supportive turned me into what I am today and allows me to be a happy person. I will always be enormously grateful for that. Of course, my brother Sebastian, now with Danielle and Alfie, played a big role as well. I really enjoy seeing you all so often, despite the geographical distance between Stuttgart, Dubai, where my brother lives, and Tilburg, where we live. The next person I would like to mention is my PhD advisor, Konrad Stahl, who is here with us today and got to wear the toga for the first time, so we have to take some nice pictures later. Konrad, you believed in me early on and sent me off to take the first year in the Berkeley Economics PhD program, while I was actually still an undergrad student in Mannheim. I learned from great economists like Dan McFadden, Paul Root, Matt Rabin, while I still was there, and this is still visible in my research today. And this is actually quite a while back already. You later became my advisor and sent me off again to UCL to work with Andrew Cheshire. That was also really important for me because I learned quite a bit about econometrics and identification while I was there. I met a lot of great people there. And most importantly, he didn't only send me away. We worked together quite a bit. We worked together this morning, for instance. We still work together. You taught me how to be a good economist, I think, to take a broader perspective and to do solid work on relevant topics. You taught me how to be intrinsically motivated. And I'm really grateful for that and enjoy to continue to work together. I moved to Tilburg in 2007, so 12 years ago, and from the very beginning, I've appreciated to work in an environment with great colleagues all across campus. Many have become friends, so the fun extends to evenings and weekends. Also, I feel privileged that I have had the chance to work with 12 exceptional PhD students so far, and for whom I'm very proud and for whom I've learned a lot. I experienced the structural econometrics group as a particularly inspiring and fruitful environment, and I'm particularly grateful to have worked so much with Jaap Abreng, Bart Bronnenberg, and Martin Salm, to single out three of my many people that I really appreciate having worked with here. Finally, I would like to express my love and gratitude to Jay. Founding a family with you and raising our little son Benedict makes me truly happy. Ik heb gezegd.
Well, Tobias, thank you very much for your inaugural address. If any one of you feels the need to discuss things with Tobias, this can be done afterwards. If he's still in the mood not to do, or if he's in the mood not to do that after this effort he just delivered, there's a whole career ahead of him, and you can address him anytime, I think. Well, this brings us to the end of this session. Professor Klein and his family will have a reception in the foyer. I advise you not to wait in a long queue, but to have a drink and decide for yourself the right moment to congratulate Professor Klein. May I ask you to leave the auditorium after the cortege, row by row, starting with the family and guests in the first row. Now I close this session with a prayer, and I ask you to stand up, and gentlemen professors to keep your, put your cap off. May we fill with the breath of life, which will guide us towards the wisdom and knowledge, to heal that which seems incurable, to accomplish that which seems impossible. This is the end of this academic session. Thank you.